The laughter drifted through the cracked window like a cruel melody, carried by the summer breeze that slipped through the peeling paint and thin curtains of her rented room. She stood perfectly still, holding a chipped mug of tea gone cold long ago, her fingers wrapped around it like it might hold her together. Beyond the glass, the house shimmered in sunlight, the house she had worked her entire life to make possible. Her name was never on the deed, but every brick, every floorboard, every flower bed had been bought with her sacrifice. And now, it belonged to someone else. Not strangers, not distant buyers, but her son, and the woman he called his wife. Balloons swayed lazily along the fence. Soft music played over hidden speakers. The laughter of well-dressed guests echoed through the manicured yard, their heels clicking against the patio stones she had helped pay for. In the center of it all, the new pool sparkled, a perfect blue rectangle bordered with white lounge chairs and striped umbrellas. It was the same pool they'd begged her to help fund, promising it would raise the value of the home and be perfect for the grandkids one day. She'd said yes, because she always did. She had emptied the last of her retirement fund into that backyard, believing it would mean belonging, believing it would mean a future where she was part of something, needed, seen. But now she wasn't even invited. She hadn't known about the party until she heard the laughter through her bedroom window, which looked directly into the yard of the house next door, the house that used to be hers in all but paperwork. She lived now in a sagging one-bedroom rental, the kind with creaky floors and cabinets that didn't quite close. The faucet leaked, the heater wheezed, but she kept it clean because even broken things deserved dignity. She had offered to stay, just until she found something better, something stable, but they had said it was best if she left, that the energy in the house was tense, that it didn't feel like hers anymore. She had nodded at the time, swallowing grief like bitter medicine. She hadn't cried in front of them. She had packed quietly, left the room she once called her sanctuary, with folded linens and a note thanking them for everything. She moved next door into the crumbling rental that now echoed with the sounds of the life she funded, but was no longer allowed to live. Today, as she watched her daughter-in-law toss her head back in laughter beside the pool, as her son handed out wine to people who had no idea whose savings built their summer oasis, the truth burned slow and deep inside her. They said the house didn't feel like mine anymore, so they made sure it wasn't. The night her husband died, the world fell silent in a way that never fully reversed. One phone call, one police officer at the door, one trembling nod, and suddenly she was a widow with a 6-year-old boy clinging to her waist, asking if Daddy was still coming home to read him a story. She held him tighter than she ever had before, not knowing then that she would spend the next 30 years trying to make up for what had been stolen from both of them in a single, shattering moment. She went back to work a week later, not because she was ready, but because the mortgage didn't grieve. Mornings were spent cleaning offices before the sun came up, evenings behind a supermarket cash register under flickering fluorescent lights. She never complained. She told herself it was worth it, that her son would never feel the absence of security, even if she felt it every night in the quiet corners of her loneliness. Vacations were a luxury she tucked away like a dream she didn't dare wake up for. While other families went to the beach or flew across states for reunions, she packed lunches in reusable containers and taught her son to find adventure in city parks and secondhand bookstores. She paid the mortgage early when she could. She put every spare dollar into a savings account labeled for the future, which meant for him, his education, his comfort, his dreams. Retirement was something she imagined in soft, faraway images. A garden, maybe, a small home with a porch swing, enough to live modestly and breathe without panic. But first, she needed to build a life for him. When he met his future wife, she smiled and welcomed her with open arms, pretending not to notice the way the girl's eyes flicked past her, already mentally rearranging the house. And when they got married, She offered him the home, the one she had spent 3 decades pouring her life into. "You need a home more than I do," she told him, and meant it. He had a growing family to think of, and she believed in building futures. She signed the paperwork without hesitation. No contract, no safety net, just trust, and the hope that love could be enough. She moved into the guest room, happy to stay out of the way, happy to help, happy just to be close. She believed family was safety. She believed love would protect her. She never questioned her place because she had earned it, not with entitlement, but with decades of quiet sacrifice. When they asked her to co-sign the pool loan, she did. When they said they needed help covering the renovations, she handed over the last of her retirement savings without blinking. It wasn't generosity, it was instinct. Because everything she did for them, for him, for the boy who once cried in her arms, for the family she believed she was still part of. But sitting in her rental now, surrounded by walls that hadn't heard their laughter, she realized the truth she had never dared to speak. She thought she was building a legacy, anchoring a family. Instead, she had been slowly writing herself out of the picture, not with anger, not with drama, just with every check, every yes, every time she put herself second. She hadn't given them a gift, she'd handed over power. And when they were done with her, they didn't need to lift a hand. She had made it too easy, too quiet, too complete. She didn't realize she was giving them the tools to bury her. It began, as most betrayals do, with a warm smile and carefully chosen words. Her son sat beside her at the kitchen table, holding her hand, his voice soft with concern. His wife poured her tea, chamomile, just the way she liked it, and spoke of how the house needed to grow to accommodate what's next. Maybe another child, maybe a home office, maybe a guest suite, for when you visit. They called it an investment. A smart move, they said, to expand the home and increase its value. They told her it would be temporary, that she would hardly notice the money gone. "You'll still be with us," her son had promised. "This is just to make room for all of us." The paperwork was already printed. All they needed was her signature. She hesitated for a moment, just a moment, not out of distrust, but out of habit. She asked no questions. She had raised him. Why would he lie? She signed. Of course she signed. The following weeks passed in a blur of dust and construction noise. She stayed out of the way, occupying the back room as workers tore up floors and hammered out walls. Her daughter-in-law was suddenly less available, her conversations clipped. Her son was buried in emails and floor plans. She cooked dinners. No one joined. She folded laundry that sat untouched. Then one evening, just as the smell of fresh paint began to settle, her son knocked on her door, not gently. Not like a son, more like a landlord. "We need to talk," he said, and she already knew. The tone, the distance in his eyes. Her heart sank before he even spoke the words. They told her it was time for her to move into a space that fit her lifestyle better, that the house was no longer the right place for her. She blinked, confused. "But I thought," she began, and his wife cut her off. "You've been saying how you like your quiet, haven't you?" she said, smiling too tightly. "This will be good for everyone. You'll have your own place, and we'll help you move in, of course." The apartment they found her was across town, tucked behind a row of shuttered shops and sagging porches. It was small, damp, and reeked of mildew. The ceiling bowed in places. The plumbing whined like an injured animal. But the rent was low, and the lease had already been signed, in her name. She stood in the doorway holding the single box they had helped her pack, staring at the narrow hallway that led to a windowless bedroom. They'd left before she'd even unpacked. No hug, no moment of gratitude. Just a take care and the hum of their car fading down the street. Weeks later, she saw the photos online, the luxury marble counters, the floor-to-ceiling windows, a spa tub in the new master bathroom. Her daughter-in-law posing beside a brand-new SUV captioned, "Built the life we dreamed of." Her heart clenched. She hadn't built a dream. She had paid for theirs. With her future, with her security, with her belief that family would never turn her into a stranger. She sat on the edge of her new bed, the springs creaking beneath her, and stared at the blank wall. Not crying, not angry, just stunned by the quiet violence of being erased. She didn't just lose her savings, she lost her place in the family. She called once, then twice. The third time, she waited for the voicemail to end so she could leave a message, just to hear her own voice acknowledge that she still existed in theirs. "Hi, it's me," she said quietly. "Just wondering how you're all doing. Let me know if you need anything." She added a soft, "Love you," and hung up before her voice could crack. Days passed. No call back. No message. Her phone stayed silent, except for appointment reminders and bills she could barely keep up with. She tried again the following week, and this time the line rang once, then went dead, sent straight to voicemail. She didn't bother calling again after that. She told herself they were just busy. Holidays were coming. Maybe they were distracted. But Thanksgiving came and went. So did her birthday. No invitations, no cards, no last-minute texts asking her to swing by for dessert or to bring her famous pie. She baked it anyway, the crust crumbling a little more than usual because her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and ate a single slice in front of the television, the rest left untouched on the counter until it hardened and had to be thrown away. On Christmas Eve, she took the little fake tree out of its cardboard box and set it on the window ledge, decorating it with paper stars she cut herself. The light string was only half working, blinking in and out like it too, wasn't sure if it should keep trying. She walked to the grocery store the next morning with a $5 bill folded tightly in her coat pocket and a coupon for instant noodles. As she reached for a carton of eggs she couldn't afford, she saw her old neighbor, Martha, from down the street, pause at the end of the aisle. Their eyes met for a second, and then Martha quickly turned, pretending to inspect the cereals as if the shelves were fascinating. The rejection stung more than she expected. They had once swapped recipes and sat on porches talking about grandkids and retirement dreams. But now, even Martha couldn't meet her gaze. She'd heard things clearly, that she'd been too difficult to live with, that she had made things tense, that maybe it was better she had her own place now. Easier for everyone, she went home with a plastic bag that crinkled loudly in the silence of her apartment. The heater clicked on for the third time that hour, a sound more of struggle than warmth. She made the noodles and sat at her little table, facing the faded wallpaper she once planned to replace. She chewed slowly, letting the steam from the bowl warm her face. On the table beside her sat a worn photo album. She flipped through it with her free hand, page after page of birthdays, vacations, school plays, graduations. There she was in every one, always slightly in the background, always smiling, her son with cake on his face, her husband holding them both before fate had ripped him away. Her daughter-in-law grinning in a white dress, hand resting on the kitchen counter that no longer existed. She stopped on a photo of her holding her grandson for the first time. Her eyes were so full in that image, like someone who still believed love would be returned if given freely enough. She sat there long after the noodles were cold, the album open, the little tree blinking faintly beside her. She wasn't angry, not anymore. Anger requires energy, and all she had left now was the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for attention. She didn't speak. There was no one to speak to, but even her silence echoed back empty. She hadn't meant to clean the closet that day. It was one of those gray afternoons when the light slanted in just right and the silence felt too heavy to ignore. The closet was more memory than storage. Boxes of old linens, a dusty sewing kit, a winter coat she no longer wore, and a stack of papers she kept promising herself she'd sort through. She tugged out a sagging shoebox tucked in the far corner, wiping the layer of dust with the edge of her sleeve. Beneath it, barely visible, was a lockbox she hadn't touched in years. The metal was cold, dented in one corner, and the key hung on a rusted chain taped to the underside of the lid. She didn't even remember putting it there. Her fingers hesitated over the lock before turning it with a soft click. Inside, the air smelled like time, like cedar and forgotten things. There were folded letters from her husband, their corners curled with age, a watch he used to wear to work, and at the very bottom, a yellowed document in a plastic sleeve. She unfolded it slowly, eyes squinting to make out the faded print. It was a land deed, signed in her husband's name and passed to her upon his death. Her breath caught. The name of the town was vaguely familiar, rural, quiet, hours from where she lived now. She had always assumed the land was worthless, a relic of the past. But something made her pause. She called an old friend from church who had once practiced real estate law. They hadn't spoken in over a year, but the woman answered, with warmth. "I think I might have something," she said, almost embarrassed, as if daring to hope out loud was somehow inappropriate. She sent photos of the deed, and by evening, her friend called back with a new tone in her voice. "You're sitting on a gold mine," she said. "That whole area is being developed. People are lining up to buy." Within a week, she was speaking to developers. They had already been reaching out to the family who owned neighboring plots. The moment they saw she held title to the last one they needed, the offers came in fast. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, a pad of paper beside her filling up with numbers she never thought she'd see again. Tens of thousands, then 6 figures, almost double what she had lost to the house, the renovations, the SUV she helped buy but never rode in. More than money, it was a restoration of worth. The day the deal closed, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat very still and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. She could breathe again, not in the shallow, careful way she had learned to manage after losing everything, but a full, deep inhale that stretched her lungs and cracked something open in her chest. She walked outside and let the cold air hit her face. For the first time in years, it didn't sting. It cleared her. She went back inside, looked around her tiny rental, and saw it differently now. It was still falling apart, but it was temporary. Everything was. Her grief, her anger, her exile. All of it was shifting. She opened her notebook, made a list of things she never thought she'd plan for again. New furniture, new windows, a better kettle, maybe even a small garden. Not because she wanted to prove anything, not because she owed anyone a story of revenge or a redemption arc, simply because she could. She looked at the deed one last time before filing it away. Her husband had signed it decades ago, never knowing. It would be the thread she would pull herself back together with. She pressed her hand to it gently, whispering a thank you to a man who had loved her in a way no one had since. A man who, even in death, had left her one last key. They had taken everything they thought mattered, her savings, her space, her dignity. But they didn't know what she still carried, what she still was. She had been buried, yes, but not broken. Not finished. They thought they emptied me out. But I wasn't done yet. She didn't announce it. No triumphant Facebook post, no cryptic quote about karma, no late-night call to confront her son or ask him why. She simply moved in silence, one step at a time. After the sale was finalized, the money deposited and secure in her name, hers and hers alone, she allowed herself one night to sit with it. The reality. The calm power of quiet control. The feeling was unfamiliar, not because she hadn't earned it, but because she had given it away so many times, so easily, for the sake of love. The next morning she brewed tea in her dented kettle, wrapped a scarf around her shoulders, and opened her laptop. She searched real estate listings the way others might read horoscopes, as if fate might speak through square footage and property lines. And then she saw it. A home for sale, modest, 2 bedrooms, a pale blue porch swing in the front photo. The address hit her like a heartbeat. It was next door to that house, her house once. The one she built in pieces, mortgage by paycheck, floor tile by sacrifice, and had been exiled from, like a guest who overstayed her welcome. She stared at the screen. 1,000 thoughts passed through her like clouds. Was it madness to return? Was it weakness to want to be near what had been taken from her? Or was it something else entirely? A quiet act of reclamation. She didn't want confrontation. She didn't need them to know she was watching. She didn't need to be seen to be present. She called the agent and scheduled a viewing. Her voice never wavered. The house was smaller than she remembered, older than the pictures suggested, but she liked it more for those reasons. It didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. It didn't ask her to be small or invisible. It simply waited. And she had waited long enough. The paperwork was handled swiftly. Cash, clean, no mortgage, no cosigner, no shared titles. She moved within 2 weeks. One small truck, a driver who asked no questions. She told the landlord of her rental she was leaving and handed back the keys without ceremony. The apartment, that had once felt like exile, now felt like an old skin she no longer needed to wear. When she arrived, the neighborhood was quiet. A child rode past on a scooter. A couple walked a dog. No one recognized her, or if they did, no one stopped her. Her son wasn't home. Neither was his wife. She saw their cars parked neatly in the drive next door, the SUV she had helped buy, glinting in the afternoon sun. She didn't linger. She stepped through her new front door and closed it gently behind her. The first few days, she kept the curtains drawn. She unpacked slowly, placing each dish and photo with care. She hung a wind chime outside her kitchen window, not to catch anyone's attention, but because she liked the sound of it in the morning. She planted rosemary in the backyard. She listened to the birds. Her silence became its own structure, a kind of invisible fence they couldn't cross. She didn't peek over the fence. She didn't walk by the windows or listen for conversations. She wasn't here to haunt them. She wasn't here for vengeance. She was here because she could be. Because she had the means, the choice, and the will. They had said the house didn't feel like hers anymore. They had sent her away under the illusion of kindness, cloaked in convenience. Now, her proximity was a whisper they couldn't erase, a presence they couldn't deny. Each night, she sat in her living room with a book and a cup of tea, the world quiet around her. Sometimes she'd hear them next door, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of voices, the clink of wine glasses. But it no longer pierced her. It no longer stung. She didn't need a seat at their table. She had built one of her own. If they didn't want her under their roof, she'd simply build her own shadow beside it. She waited until spring. Let the frost melt, let the neighborhood bloom back into itself. Then, quietly, she sent out a few cards in the mail, handwritten invitations, soft beige paper with gold script, no social media, no fuss. Just a simple message. Housewarming, tea and light lunch. I'd love to see you again. Most hadn't heard from her in years. Some thought she had moved away. A few had wondered if the rumors were true, that she had been pushed out, discarded like old furniture. But they came anyway. The ones who remembered her laugh, her stories, her quiet generosity. They stepped into her small blue house next door and were greeted with fresh lilies, warm bread, a table full of homemade food, and the calm smile of a woman who had found her footing again. The laughter started small, an inside joke, a shared memory, and then it grew, spilling out through the open windows, carried by sunlight and the scent of rosemary from her new herb garden. Children played on the lawn. Someone strummed a guitar. It wasn't a party, not in the grand, showy sense. It was something gentler, more powerful, the kind of joy that needs no announcement, the kind of joy that lingers. From the other side of the fence, her son's house sat quiet. Curtains twitched. A door opened, then closed. They hadn't expected her to come back, much less to thrive. They'd hoped she'd fade away quietly, become someone else's burden in a place far enough to forget. But there she was, not shouting, not accusing, just blooming. The image stung more than any words could have. The next week she hired a landscaper, not for extravagance, but for privacy. A garden wall, tall and ivy-covered, stretching the length of the property line. It went up steadily, inch by inch, until the pool she had paid for disappeared from view, until their yard no longer bled into hers. When the wall was finished, she planted lavender along the base. The scent wafted through the air, sweet and unapologetic. A boundary drawn not in anger, but in peace. Then she made a phone call. Just one. To the same lawyer friend who had helped her sell the land. They sat over tea, reviewing old bank records, transfer receipts, text messages about shared investments. Quietly, methodically, the paper trail was pieced together. Her name was on more than she realized. And more importantly, her silence had never signed away her rights. Within weeks, legal notices were filed, not for revenge, but for accountability. She didn't want to destroy them, she simply wanted what was hers. What had been taken under the illusion of trust. While she tended to her garden and watered her basil, the house next door began to tremble under its own weight. Renovations came with ballooned property taxes. The SUV needed expensive repairs. A contractor filed a claim for unpaid work. The accountant, the one they had once bragged about, found discrepancies in their filings. Bit by bit, the life they had built on borrowed comfort began to crumble. She watched none of it. She didn't gloat. She never raised her voice, but the neighborhood noticed. The whispers returned, not about her, but about them, how they had treated her, how quickly things changed after she left. Invitations stopped coming. Smiles turned stiff. The couple who once boasted about building their dream life now shuttered themselves indoors, avoiding the very eyes that once praised them. She, meanwhile, trimmed her rose bushes, hosted small dinners, mailed birthday cards to old friends. Her home was not grand, but it was whole. There was a kind of power in being invisible until you chose not to be. In showing that the person you tried to erase came back, not for war, but for grace. She didn't raise her voice. But she changed everything. It happened on a Sunday morning, soft and golden, the kind of day that used to make her ache with longing. She was pruning her lavender, the sun warming her back, when she heard the sound of footsteps on gravel. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She knew that rhythm, heavy, hesitant, not quite ready to be honest. He knocked once, then again. "Mom," he called gently, like he was still the little boy who used to ask for an extra bedtime story. "Can we talk?" She stood still, shears in hand, heart steady. She didn't move, didn't flinch. The knock came again, softer. A pause. Then footsteps retreating down the porch. She waited until the front gate clicked shut before she exhaled. She walked inside and poured herself a cup of tea, her hands calm. No trembling, no anger. Just a quiet affirmation that she owed herself peace more than she owed him closure. Later that night, her phone buzzed. A message request from someone she hadn't heard from in months. The profile picture showed a perfect smile, well lit, and curated. The message was short. "Let's be a family again. No apology, no ownership." Just a vague plea, dropped into her inbox like a hook baited with nostalgia. She stared at it for a moment, then swiped left and hit delete. It was not cruelty. It was choice. The kind she hadn't had the courage to make until now. The next day, she saw them outside in their driveway. Not the polished couple that used to wave from manicured grass, but two people unraveling in hushed argument. Arms crossed, fingers pointed. Her son's voice rose, then dipped. The wife turned away. A car door slammed. A neighbor glanced up from trimming hedges. The whispers started, soft, curious, sharp. Something had cracked, and the sound of it traveled. She watered her herbs and clipped her dead blooms, letting the sun settle gently on her shoulders. Her garden wall stood high and silent. Ivy curling upward like it too, had no need to explain itself. There was no satisfaction in their unraveling, no triumph, just clarity. For all the months they had gone silent, for every holiday past, over every message unanswered, she had grieved the loss of them like a death. But now they came knocking, not out of love, but out of need. And she had no more to give. When they finally remembered me, I had already moved on. The scent of turpentine and crushed violets lingered in the air, mixing with sunlight that spilled across the hardwood floor. Her small living room had transformed. Easels lined the walls, paintbrushes rested in jars like bouquets, and canvases leaned against chairs, waiting for hands to bring them to life. It had started with a simple idea, a passing thought she nearly dismissed. What if I taught a class? Not for income, she didn't need much anymore, but for something deeper. A reason to wake up with purpose. A space to give without being. Emptied. She printed a flyer at the local library and posted it on the co-op board by the grocery store. Within 2 days, she had 6 replies. Now, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, the room filled with soft chatter, the rustle of sketchbooks, and the laughter of women who, like her, had been quietly overlooked for years. One woman painted garden scenes from memory. Another did abstract swirls of emotion. They weren't trying to be artists. They were trying to remember what it felt like to create something that didn't have to justify itself. After class, a few of them would stay. They'd make tea, sit in the backyard under the blooming wisteria, and talk about everything and nothing. It wasn't loud joy, it was gentle, shared warmth. She'd become close with her neighbor across the street, George, a quiet man with silver hair and kind eyes who had lost his wife the winter before. He'd show up with fresh bread from the bakery or help carry groceries without being asked. Sometimes they'd sit on her porch just watching the day pass, saying little, needing even less. There was no obligation, just ease. She no longer woke up anxious, no longer tiptoed around herself. In this space, in this version of her life, she didn't have to shrink to fit. She wore her bold scarves again, the ones her daughter-in-law once called too loud. She played records while she cooked, danced barefoot across the kitchen just because she could. Her home didn't need permission to be filled with life. One morning, she stood at the window watering the rosemary and saw a delivery van pull into her old driveway. Packages stacked high, a harried look on her daughter-in-law's face, her son nowhere in sight. She watched for a moment, then turned away. The ache had dulled now, no longer a wound, just a scar with a story. She wasn't jealous. She wasn't angry. They had chosen their path, and so had she. Later that week, during one of her classes, a student asked where she had learned to paint. She smiled, thinking of quiet evenings long ago, her husband at the table grading papers, her son asleep down the hall, and her sitting cross-legged on the floor with a brush and a dream. I used to paint in the in-between moments, she said, softly. Now I paint in the center of my life. That night, she looked through an old photo album, not out of sadness, but gratitude, for everything that came before, for the girl she used to be, for the woman who had survived it all. She traced her finger along a picture of her younger self, holding her son in her arms, exhausted, smiling, strong. A foundation no one had ever truly seen until now. She had been called difficult, demanding, a burden. But she saw it clearly, now. She had never been the weight. She had been the scaffolding, the structure, the hands holding everything up. I wasn't the burden, she thought, closing the album gently. I was the foundation. and they forgot. But she hadn't. And finally, in this quiet, blooming corner of her life, she had peace. The house was quiet, but not empty. It pulsed with the soft hum of life well lived, the scent of garlic still lingering in the kitchen, the low murmur of a record spinning in the next room, the ticking of the old clock above the mantel. The walls were painted in soft earth tones, now no longer dull and forgotten like the place she once occupied. Framed paintings from her students hung proudly, their brushstrokes bold and imperfect, just like her journey. The table was set for one. A smooth wooden surface, polished lovingly, reflected the golden glow of candlelight. A single plate, a linen napkin folded neatly beside it, a glass of water catching the flicker of the flame like a prism. She moved slowly, deliberately, carrying the last dish from the stove. It wasn't elaborate, just a small roast chicken, a scoop of buttery potatoes, and green beans seasoned the way she liked. No one criticized the salt. No one pushed her aside to make room. There were no passive remarks about portion sizes, no hushed sighs exchanged between guests who wished she wouldn't speak so much. This was her table, her meal, her rules. She sat down with grace, smoothing her skirt as she lowered herself into the chair. Her hands, once shaky from fear and exhaustion, were steady now. They didn't tremble as they had the day she packed. Her bags into a cab, leaving behind the house she had built, the life she had poured into others until she had nothing left. No. Tonight, her hands were sure. The hands of a woman who had fought through silence, rebuilt from beneath the rubble of betrayal, and planted new roots just steps away from where her heart had once been shattered. She took her first bite slowly. The food wasn't just nourishment. It was proof. Proof that she could stand on her own, feed herself in every sense, and no longer be afraid of being alone. The walls didn't echo with emptiness now. They whispered with memory, with peace, with a presence she had reclaimed inch by inch. She looked toward the garden through the back window. The ivy had climbed high along the privacy wall, its green fingers stretching confidently toward the sky. The lavender swayed gently, and from the porch, the wind chime offered its usual hush. She could hear faint sounds next door, the clinking of dishes, a muffled voice rising, falling. It didn't pull her in, it didn't hurt, it simply existed, like distant thunder from a storm long past. She let the silence around her settle. She didn't need applause or recognition. She didn't need them to know how far she had come. For the first time, her worth wasn't measured by what she gave or endured. It was simply there, woven into every corner of this home, every breath of air she could finally take without bracing for pain. As she ate, she thought about all that had been taken from her. Not just money, not just comfort, but something more sacred: trust, belonging, identity. They had spent her years like currency, worn her love like a borrowed coat, and discarded her the moment it no longer fit their image. But they had made one fatal mistake. They believed they had emptied her out. That exile would break her. That silence would undo her. But she had risen from the silence. She had built again, not with resentment, but with resilience, not with noise, but with grace. And as she placed her fork gently on the plate, she allowed herself a small smile, not of victory, but of restoration. They had stolen the comfort of her retirement, the house she once called home, and the seat at the table she had so willingly earned. But they had not, and could never, steal her strength. She reached for her wine glass, lifted it slowly, and whispered not a toast but a truth, soft, clear, undeniable. This time I ate at my table, alone and free.